All right. Well, we are officially live. Welcome, everybody, to Heretics Anonymous, the video branch of Aeon by Gnostic Radio. All right. Well, we are officially live. Welcome, everybody, to Heretics Anonymous. Is that an echo? Oh, I've got myself on the live thing. Okay, better put myself on mute as people go into the chat room. And again, this is Heretics Anonymous. My name is Miguel Connor. I am a heretic. As always, this will be on YouTube, but we will have a audio version that will be placed in all of our Aeon Byte channels, YouTube, iTunes, podcatchers, at the website. And Aeon Byte is even now on Spotify, so you can listen to Aeon Byte on Spotify. So tonight, we definitely have the pleasure, after a few glitches last night, to have with us Joe Atwill. Joe, thanks for coming back. It's great to see you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The honor is all ours. And with us, we should be having Lee, but I think it's his turn tonight to be having technical difficulties. So Joe has been spared. I have been spared. People are starting to go into the chat. So we'll get started while Lee tries to get his technical issues done, the archons out of his system. Definitely want to start with Joe, and I want to keep it more contemporary or newsy because I'm sure you've heard, Joe, that last week came out all these MK Ultra documents. I don't know if you've heard this. Some of it was redacted, but it doesn't seem to make the mainstream news, even though it's so important. And again, it shows these cats doing not just mind experiments in hospitals in Canada, but actually practicing mass mind control. What is your take on these documents, since you've been following MK Ultra for a long time?
The documents seem to prove that MK Ultra wasn't an attempt, as it has represented itself, to develop a robotic soldier. You know, if you look at like the Bourne Identity and the Manchurian Candidate, there's this kind of propaganda concept that MK Ultra was looking to develop a human weapon. But you don't really hear much about its efforts to control culture and society. These documents clearly show that that was a focus of the project, and of course they strongly indicate that the CIA should have been shut down. I mean, it's the organization is criminal in that it was trying to affect culture. And that's something that, government organizations, they're thwarting democracy, if nothing else, because they're creating this mind control. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm glad the documents came out. It's sad that they don't get more play than they have been, but then maybe that's our responsibility onto the alt media. We need to get people to be aware of them.
Yeah, agreed. And this really comes down to a concept that I love that, well, I can't say you came up with it. It seems very normal. And that's called weaponized anthropology. Maybe you can tell, for those of us just joining, what is weaponized anthropology, Joe, and when did it start?
Sure. It's an expression that was created by Dr. David Price. He wrote a book which highlighted the letters of Gregory Bateson. Bateson is a famous humanist and sex, drug, and rock and roll proponent. He was at the Echelon, and during World War II, he was, like all the other anthropologists on the planet, he was working for the government intelligence agencies, and he wrote a series of letters where he outlined. He did not give theoretical advice. He actually gave practical how-to advice as far as how to have a stable slave state. And so Price was very upset about this and questioned, what was in back of Bateson's humanistic persona. And he described the science that Bateson was creating for the oligarchs. Because remember, the OSS was run by the oligarchs. It wasn't so much a government operation as it was something that was coming from wealthy banking families. Anyway, so he described that science as weaponized anthropology, and I use the expression, in a broader sense, because I feel that then you went into the application of a lot of these scientific constructions in the creation of the counterculture. I think if you look at the work that Dave McGowan did in terms of identifying the family backgrounds of all of the rock and roll stars that came out of Laurel Canyon, and then you juxtapose that to the backgrounds of the Grateful Dead, the connections into military intelligence, and into the Tavistock Institute, et cetera, you can see that the music that was presented to young people to be listened to while they were taking LSD had been weaponized. That this was something that was a deliberate attempt to basically, in my opinion, they were trying to shatter the family and ethnicity. They wanted to have an atomized society where the individual was separate. You'd end up with the single mom and the pornographic male. And that those individuals be very easy to control. And so I think you saw Bateson's science in real-time application with the counterculture. And I've written a piece about the Grateful Dead and Ken Kesey, which is on a website called Post Flaviana, if anyone's interested in it. And that's basically going to be one of the chapters in a new book I'm working on that's going to try to help people understand the counterculture, and then also World War II and just everything I think is useful to know in terms of weaponized anthropology.
Yeah, it's something else. I remember reading that article years ago on the Grateful Dead, and it really blew my mind. It was like taking brown acid and then following all the trails to the 60s, and it was quite an octopus. Lee, can you hear us, or is your audio working, man?
Hi, Miguel. Hi, Joe. How are you guys tonight?
There you are.
Good. How are you?
Good to see you here with us, fellow heretics. So, yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, Joe, because it's hard where to start, because I remember one big truth I found out is you have got the Iliad in Homer's Iliad, and the Trojan War, and you think it's this great poetic, heroic saga, or whatever. Then you find out that the story is based because Zeus decided the world was overpopulated, and he wanted a manageable population to control. And this great myth happened thousands of years ago, and what I'm finding out is it continues throughout history. There are these oligarchs who, like I say, want to have a eugenics program, want to keep our population under control, and want us deaf, dumb, and blind to follow these quote-unquote gods. And of course, your book, Caesar's Messiah, Joe, it's this continuation 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, we have really suffered. First Christianity and the feudal system, which was a slave system that had at the top of it the Pope, which was basically Caesar by another name. The serfs were told that if they obeyed, there was a workers' paradise waiting for them after they died. This was an ideal configuration for the oligarchs that basically owned them, because it was a slave system. It was ideal for them to believe such a thing. Unfortunately, people think about the Renaissance as having ended the kind of muscular control over the minds of the Europeans that Christianity had, but it was just replaced by another group. And in fact, in my opinion, that group had been working to subvert Christianity but not with the idea of liberating the European people. Just on the contrary, they just wanted to slip themselves into the role of oligarchs. And so I think that sadly, when you look closely at the history of the last 180 years, you can see that the same mind control has been applied to Europeans as had been done during the feudal system, but with a much more technical application, and with even greater catastrophe. I mean, if you look at the number of Europeans killed in the world wars and the related events, I mean, you can't even get a rounding number like closer than 10 million. And it's really quite interesting, to me that, on one hand, you have the famous Holocaust number of 6 million. But on the other hand, you have some number, question mark, as to how many Europeans have been killed during basically from, the two world wars. And I've actually tried to go through this, Miguel, and I can't even come close. No one has a clue as to how many people died. Was it 200 million, 250 million, one estimate, 150 million? No one knows. So the thing is, I just, one of the things I always try to encourage is that Europeans need to learn to count the bodies.
Yeah, no kidding. And of course, but of course the rule is these days is the mainstream rule is, okay, World War One, that was a big mistake and a big cluster F.
Who knows how it started? It was just like history unfolded, and there was a lot of people that got killed. Who knows? It's impossible to know.
But World War II was supposed to be the just war, the noble war. It just kind of happened. It was natural of good versus evil. But I don't think you agree with that, do you, Joe?
No, I mean, I completely disagree. I don't think that Hitler was organic to the German people. I think that the Nazi Party and Hitler had been constructed by the oligarchs going back into the 1840s, for God's sakes. I mean, it was that long of a project. Yeah. And I think that, and I'm trying to get more and more actual research scholars to get into this, because I really think the evidence is overwhelming. And I'd love to have just teams of people studying the evidence that traces the construction of the Nazi Party going back to Palmerston in 1842, when he made the statement, which was just incredible at the time. He said, now is the time, this is 1842, he says, now is the time for the Jews to return to their homeland. Now, Palmerston was purportedly an Anglican, right? He, of course, was a huge Freemason. In fact, when he was in the Orient, he was the head Freemason of the Orient. He had some bizarre title, Poobah stuff. But he's actually the one that manned the gunships that slaughtered the Chinese who were trying to resist the opium addiction.
No.
Yeah, and he was also the guy who had ownership of enormous tracts of Ireland and was assisting the creation of what's been called the Irish Holocaust, where there was deliberate famine brought against that people, and Palmerston was completely involved in that. Now, that's why his statement seems so odd, because this guy does not have, people say, well, he's just a humanist and he just loves Jews and wants to help them. Well, he didn't have any humanism when he was like slaughtering Chinese or starving Irish, right? So what is going on there? And from that moment on, from Palmerston's statement right through to basically the end of World War II, it's just a straight line. A very small group is in control. They're creating both Zionism and the Nazi Party. And in my opinion, they were simply maneuvering the Europeans around the world like pieces on a chessboard. They wanted to reduce European population, and they wanted to move a lot of the European Jews back to Israel. Those were goals. And so to do this, they actually created the history that we experienced as a complete catastrophic devastation of Europe, right? So I think that's how rough these guys play. I think that, it's people may find these, these assertions, they just cut across all of kind of the normal understanding of history. So I'm sure will contest it. But sad to say, if you look at the group that creates the Nazi Party, you can see the iterations are all centered around what's called the Theosophical Society. This is what then eventually creates the Tool Society after several iterations of, they rename the organization, but it's always the same group. It's the same group that creates the funding for the Nazi Party. They create the Masonic right-angled swastika. They create the concept of National Socialism, which they then take into Germany in the 1890s. They created the idea of the Aryan supremacy. And these ideas had never been in Europe before, and they all come from the same group. And then they also add anti-Semitism. And I'll give you an example of how preposterous this whole thing is. So they needed anti-Semitism to inflame German sentiment and also to maneuver the Jews in Europe to Israel. So they concocted the what's called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, the protocols were found, amazingly, by this woman named Jolinka, who just happened to be one of Helen Blavatsky's close associates and followers. And for a period of time, they were necessary to promote anti-Semitism. But the group that is trying to achieve the creation of Israel is obviously very philo-Judaic. They are the most supporters of Jews imaginable. In fact, I would believe that the group are crypto-Jews. But whatever they are, they certainly are promoters of Jewish interests. And so they have to, once the intended maneuver has been has been completed and they have Israel established, they have to make sure that the protocols of the Elders of Zion are brought into control and basically exposed as a fraud because they've achieved the goal that they had for them. So they find one intrepid literary researcher just happened to find the manuscript upon which the protocols were generated, right? So they exposed the protocols as a fraud because they were basically developed from another manuscript. Guess who the guy was, this intrepid literary researcher who found the basis of the manuscript that was the basis for the protocols? You'll never guess it. It was Alan Dulles.
No, oh my
Alan
God.
Dulles, the intrepid literary researcher. I mean, here's a guy that is not even known to be able to read. And of course, he becomes the head of the CIA, but he was the one who...
Well, men in history.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable. So, in fact, there's just, if you look at the historical construction of like the Nazi Party, it is filled with this kind of these preposterous and just crazy circumstances, where you end up with the Warburg family funding the construction of the German war machine. Right. And so, yeah, Alan Dulles, right. And so the thing is that he could read. And I was just teasing. So the thing is that you have just, a sequence of events that to just anyone who really starts, I think, looking at it closely will see is completely artificial. And so because the reason why, Miguel, is because it is this tiny group that is coming from actually a research lodge in Britain. I should back up just because I don't want people to kind of lose the train of thought. But when Palmerston began the process to create Zionism, which incidentally was news to the Jews, when Palmerston made his statement about now is the time, and this set off what becomes the actual reality of Zionism in the 1840s, Jews had no idea what he was talking about. They couldn't believe it. Why would an Anglican, have this idea about the restoration of Israel, which wasn't even on the table for Jews in Europe? But he did, and so they began a whole series of research projects into Judea, which incidentally wasn't even part of the British Empire at the time. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. But Palmerston arranged, and they never stopped. There was just a series of these research projects which basically went into Judea, which was Palestine, to do surveys and also to find archaeologic evidence of the ancient nation of Israel, because they didn't have any. They had the stories, but they really didn't have any archaeologic evidence. So you had a series of expeditions which the British royal family participated in. The Churchill family, the Cecil family, all of the long-standing Masonic, purportedly, Christian families were involved in this. There were almost no Jews whatsoever. It was just these Anglican Masons, Freemasons, that were wanting to create the state of Israel. And of course, this ends up with the Balfour Declaration, written by Balfour, who was, a Cecil. The Cecils are related to the Churchills. One of Winston Churchill's relatives was one of the proto-Zionists. There were no Jews. The only Jew who was involved in any of this was Disraeli, who his background is mysterious. He was at least half Jewish. They don't really know that much about the other side of his family, but he created this character, Theodore Herzl. Again, it's just one of these preposterous things where Herzl brings a document. I think the name it was about the Jews returning, and he gives his speech at this conference of Jewish people. And this guy comes up to him afterwards and he says, you didn't write that. And Herzl gets outraged and he goes, absolutely, what are you talking about? He goes, well, I actually know that was written by Disraeli. And Herzl was just furious. And the guy goes, well, sir, I actually am the person who translated Disraeli's work. So I know perfectly well where you got the information. And so Herzl was just one of the cutouts, that they were using to separate from the events of history from the people that were originating all of this stuff. But anyway, so the British royals then set up these programs where they were doing surveys of Judea, trying to establish where Israel should be, basically where the line should be drawn and where was the ancient kingdoms. And one of the expeditions was led by Charles Warren. Warren then, when he's done with that, he writes these crazy Zionist tracts about how it's just going to be so beneficial for mankind to have the Jews back in Israel. And then he returns to England. They make him chief of police of London. He's the one who actually oversaw the cover-up of the Jack the Ripper case. It was Charles Warren. He was the guy who the royal family put in there to make sure that no leads came into a direction of someone of importance. But then, more importantly, Warren then set up a research lodge. Warren, of course, is a huge Pumbaa Freemason, and he sets up this research lodge called the Quattro Coronati, and people need to study that lodge, because the Quattro Coronati is where both Zionism and the Nazi Party are actually going to emanate from as you go forward. They were the ones that actually, they put this mysticism, because remember, think how the proto-Nazis had this mysticism. There was all this Aryan fantasy world, that they were like promoting. Well, that all comes from right here. It comes from the Quattro Coronati. They bring back astrology. There's a really good researcher. In fact, the guy that really kind of set me down this path is a guy named Anton, I forget his last name. It's Chaikin. And he's a LaRouche researcher. And he's the one who actually started connecting the Quattro Coronati with both Zionism and the creation of the Nazi Party. He didn't go all the way. And he actually, because LaRouche, the researchers tend to take the position that the British royal family is the real source of power and everything goes back to them. That was kind of where his analysis stopped. But I think, you can take it much further than that. In any case, when I started looking into this, it wasn't too long, several months. I realized that he was absolutely right. It was, there was a lot more detail that could be fleshed out as far as how the process actually was brought about. They and it's interesting because this group also spun out Aleister Crowley, and so you can see that he was actually involved in this. The person that was the most central organizer to the Nazi Party is a woman named Helen Blavatsky, She was, a European mystic purportedly, but this is nonsense. That's just a cover story. She organized what's called the Theosophical Society. And that organization was very tiny, maybe 1,000 people really were active in it. But from that organization came the right-angled Masonic swastika, came the concept of Aryan supremacy. These are not things that ever existed anywhere before. Came anti-Semitism. This group brought forward the protocols, the Elders of Zion. They developed the concept of the world teacher. I mean, think of Hitler's early speeches where he'd get up there and say, we're standing here before God. And we'd have all this muck language about the German Aryan stuff. It all comes right out of Blavatsky's work. Now,
is it true that, if you'll allow me just a moment, is it true that the swastika was actually an ancient Buddhist symbol? Or
yeah,
wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And in fact, it had been used by many different people. The first right-angled, if you look at the swastika that Blavatsky developed, it's right-angled, which like 50% of them presumably would be right-angled. But it was also angled 45 degrees, so it as it sits there, it's like sitting on a point. That's a very unusual version of the swastika, and that was the one that was adopted by the Nazis. And it's clear that
the symbol actually represents a vortex, or it's actually it's kind of about vortex mathematics, and it's talking about energy generation.
Believe me, there are many different ways that the symbol has been used. I mean, I think you're talking about more like ancient usage of the swastika. I can send you a document that was written in the 1890s, which describes the meaning of the swastika to Freemasons. And I think this is, and they had their definition is not too different than that, but they have, it's one of the initiations. It's one of the very high level initiations of what they, I can actually send you the link to this, but it was well known in Freemasons, like Rudyard Kipling, used it as like his personal symbol in 1890s through 1920. And his books, you'll actually see the swastika. And again, that is the Masonic swastika like Blavatsky used. So the swastika, as Blavatsky developed it, was definitely the one that the Nazi Party picked up, because they also picked up all the other aspects. They picked up the concept of Aryan supremacy, which was actually developed by Blavatsky. They picked up the term National Socialism, right? That actually comes from the Bellamy's. You're familiar with them? The Bellamy, their cousins, 1890. They were theosophists, and they developed the concept of National Socialism. Nationalism was very important. It was very important for their intentions for Europe. They needed to, because in order to create obedience, you have to have a nation, a very powerful nation. And so National Socialism was developed by these members of the Theosophical Society in around the 1880s, 1890s, and they brought it to Germany. So before there was like the Tool Society, which was promoting a kind of they called it the National Social Workers Party. That's the organization that Hitler then used as his political platform. He actually just took over from the Tool Society. It was created by Sabbatendorf, who had been both a Freemason and member and a follower of Blavatsky. So you have at the end of this long process, you have all of the concepts that are going to be, part of the Nazi Party. Everything you can think of has already been developed. It's already has been normalized in Germany. And then you have the financial piece, which is that Hitler is then funded through Montague Norman. Montague Norman was the head of the Bank of England. And again, he was a theosophist. He's also, of course, part of this Freemason clique. He is part of the Cliveden set, these high-level Masons who are in back of everything. And he then creates the method by which the Nazi Party can be funded. And my point is, and every one of the points I bring up can be contested, of course. I mean, the idea, but what can't be contested is that all of them became parts of the Nazi Party. They're all very, the straight arm salute, that comes from the Bellamy's. The swastika comes from Blavatsky. It's all the different parts are being assembled and put into German culture long before you see them in the 1930s, long before. And you see, they all come from the small group. You can trace every single one of them. And my point is this. You could say, well, this is kind of natural because this is a development of a mystical concept which somehow got perverted and ended up as what Hitler's. Okay, you could make that case, but here's the problem: the money that was funding Hitler was still coming long after Hitler had come into power. You see, the money didn't stop when Hitler took over the party and started and produced Mein Kampf. The money kept coming from the same group because they had to fund IG Farben and all these large projects. So Montague Norman arranged for an American company to help with the funding, and that's the famous Brown Brothers Harriman. Brown Brothers Harriman is where Prescott Bush worked. They talk about the Bush family being Nazis. Well, this is what they mean. Prescott Bush was one of the members of Brown Brothers Harriman. That organization funneled money, and is known to have done so, into the beginning of the Nazi Party, the beginning of the Nazi war machine. So you end up with this organization, Brown Brothers, merging with Averell Harriman's group to create Brown Brothers Harriman. And if you go to Wikipedia, they actually list the members of the original Brown Brothers Harriman roster. It's like 90% skull and bones. 90%. I mean, it's just a complete. You just look at just beyond belief. So what happens is.
John, can I stop you there? I just want to.
I'm ranting here. Sorry.
Yeah, because so basically, what I'm seeing is.
Yeah.
You talk about one force basically bringing in Nazism and Zionism. Is this what you call controlled opposition, like today?
100%.
The Republicans and the Democrats are really one force, but by this controlled opposition is how you can destroy and control the narrative. Is this what it was back then?
Yes, absolutely. 100%. It was controlled opposition. They controlled both sides. And if you want to see a physical example of controlling both sides of the war, there actually is a piece of evidence that even like anyone can see, and I think it's conclusive. They love, this prefiguration. It is a way to mock the individuals who are going to be slaughtered, and it also it's basically they're using the kind of they're kind of reversing the mockery that the Romans had with they use the prophecies of Daniel, but they were writing prophecy after the fact, so they could look like they could see into the future, and this was a way of like mocking the stupidity of the people that they were warring against. Well, you look at, like, for example, all of the prefigurations of 9/11. I mean, they're legendary, right? You see it in movies all sorts of times. You'll see it like September 11th. It's like for some reason they'll find a way to get it in there. Well, the very most significant piece of prefiguration for people to recognize and to look at is the license plate on Archduke Ferdinand's car the day he's assassinated. Or I don't know, have you ever seen it?
No. What did it say?
It's A111119. Now remember, it was armistice was signed, went into effect on November 11th. 1119.
Oh,
so
wow.
I mean, this is actually, people have wondered. They go, this just seems cosmic, because this is something that is on the internet. They've actually now finally they're producing it, and you can see that. Now, in order for this piece of prefiguration to have been put into existence, both sides had to be controlled, right?
Right.
And of course, both sides were Masonic. I mean, if you look at, like the Masonic group in the Allies and the Masonic group in the Kaiser, under Kaiser, it makes a lot of sense that they could actually, come up with the date of the armistice. Now, there was another date involved with the ending of World War I. That was the date of the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. You had the armistice, which was on November 11th, but then the Treaty of Versailles was signed on, I think it was June 28th. And miraculously, the date of the assassination of the Archduke was June 28th. So you have this comical repetition of dates, right, where the license plate is A111119, and then the dates of the assassination and the dates of the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, this is just a way of mocking the people who are being slaughtered, because, obviously you can't have that kind of such absolutely clear-cut prefiguration unless you can control both sides.
Joe, are you familiar with the work of James Corbett?
Sure.
So he just released that World War I documentary. I think you would really enjoy it.
I would love to see it. I haven't, but I do love his work, and I will make a point of seeing it.
It's a fantastic research.
Thanks for the tip. Yeah, I just love Corbett stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is. It's quite a rabbit hole. I mean, I don't even know. We could go on, but another question I had for you, Joe, and this is sort of a synchronicity.
Prefiguration.
Yeah, or a Mandela. Maybe we'll blame it on the Mandela effect. If all fails, we'll go Mandela effect. Things are just. But recently, a topic that has come up has been the Beatles. And for example, we had Tracy Twyman, and she had a negative take on the Beatles, although a fascinating take on the Yellow Submarine, how it's a Gnostic tale. Then we had Tobias Churton, and his is, of course, is a lot more positive. And then soon I'll be releasing an interview with Jason Horsley, who you know, and of course he has on the dark side of the 60s. But you've written about the Beatles. Tell us about the Beatles for the audience who hasn't been able to read your work on them.
Well, I mean, the Beatles are a Masonic cesspool. And that's the actual fact. You look at like the album Past Masters, which is it's a term in Freemasonry, and they had 33 songs on it, I believe. I did an analysis of I Am the Walrus, and I showed that, I don't know if Lennon actually wrote it. I doubt very much if he did, but whoever wrote that was a master of typology, right? They really understood like a very sophisticated kind of literary genre. But moreover, it is a 100% homage to Freemason victory and genocide. It starts out, I am you, you are me, and we are all together. Well, that's the song that was sung by the Boers when they were being chased by the Masonic British Army during the Boer War. That particular group ends up in Camp Irene. That's the first concentration camp. Women and children are slaughtered en masse. And there was an inquiry afterwards, and the British were sorry that so many people died, particularly all the kids, but a shame. That was just too bad. But the thing is that the next line is, see how they run like pigs from a gun.
Right.
Now, I point out that this, one line in literature often relates to the line above it. It's not a very unusual, structure. And in this case, it would clearly indicate that Lenin is making a pun because boar and pigs, see how they run like pigs from a gun. Now, this is clearly the case, guys. This is clearly the case, because then he goes, I'm crying. Now, this comes from the Walrus and the Carpenter, Lewis Carroll, the Masonic.
He wasn't actually a Mason. Charles Lutwidge Dodgson is his real name, and he wasn't.
But the thing is that remember, it's a secret society, And I would say just the definitions of the names that he picked shows that he's a Mason. Lewis is a term in Masonry, and Carol is often used. It means warrior. So I mean, I can't prove like Masonic. I can't cite his lodge, but I can certainly show you in like Alice in Wonderland and in the Walrus and the Carpenter. I mean, I can just what I'm saying is that this is part of a secret society. Obviously, it can be. I think it's linked in with the Masons, and in the poem, you have the expression. The walrus and the carpenter lure a young generation of oysters. They're called oysters, but it seems as though you're talking about a young generation of humans because the oysters have legs and can walk. The walrus and the carpenter kill them and eat them. And then they cry. They start crying because there's no more left to kill and eat. And so Lennon, he then picks up the refrain and he says, I'm crying. Right. This is after the Camp Irene homage. And then so suddenly you can see that, well, look, this is all like actually making a kind of picture. The expression cuckoo cachoo. Now that comes from
cuckoo cajube.
Yeah, cuckoo cajube.
It's a G.
Pardon me?
It's actually a G.
Okay.
Cuckoo cajube.
Cuckoo cajube, right. Thank you. It comes from Joyce. And it's an expression of triumph after the apocalypse that is being represented by Joyce in his like comical way, and so you now have like you start lining up all of these details, and you get one basically Masonic triumph after another, and you can see that the construction of the poem is not gibberish. In fact, when Lennon talked about it, he didn't even seem to have an understanding of Lewis Carroll's poem, which was kind of mysterious. He said, well, I only realized later on that the carpenter
was Lewis Carroll's poetry. That's a fact.
He
knew of Lewis Carroll's poem.
He was supposed to have been like a student of it, and that's why he based I Am the Walrus. He based this saying that he really liked, the Carroll's poems. But then when he was directly asked questions about it, he had no idea what the poem was about. He said, I made a mistake, and I thought the walrus was the good guy, but I should have made it about the carpenter.
Well, they say that the walrus is supposed to be representative of Buddhism and that the carpenter is supposed to be Christ. So there's other
ways. Symbolic literature can always be read in different ways, but I've read that interpretation, but I think this is far-fetched because of the direct execution of a generation and then of remorse over the fact there's none left to kill. I've always thought that's not very Christ-like, but anyway, so the carpenter, because that's expression for Jesus, but you have to remember this: that is a mistranslation. That comes from the Gospels, right? Where they have Jesus, they say he's a carpenter or he's the son of a carpenter. It's like a mystery about his identity. But actually, that is a deliberate mistranslation. That the word is tekton. It means mason.
Mason, yeah.
And in the Gospels, you see this is clearly the case because if you look at the construction of the literature, there is tons of Masonic images. Make straight a path, the cornerstone, the plumb line of the Lord. Even the main character, Simon changes his name to Peter, which means stone, right? So the idea that you would suddenly have someone working with wood, no, it means mason. And in fact, today in the Greek language today, not the Conic Greek, but the ancient Greek, but they're just as the word has come through history, it is the word that is used for Freemason, tekton. So the thing is that this is the kind of the struggle that I see in history is that you have, the tektons, and then you have Roman oligarchs, and they're having a kind of internal struggle. And the people, we are just, we think it's history unfolding, but actually the oligarchs are at war with one another. And so anyway, so I think that people want to see the analysis, because it's, there's a lot more to it than I can just go into here quickly, but it's at Post Flaviana, or you can just Google my name and I am the Walrus, and it'll pop right up and you take a peek at it. And one thing I show is that when the Beatles represented the song, this was one of the very first music videos ever made, was I Am the Walrus. The Beatles did it, with Magical Mystery Tour, I think is when they did it. But in a very amazing technical achievement at that time, they put a film within the film, and I actually have that there in the article showing how the video went. And the Beatles then, when Lennon is going, at the end where he's going cuckoo, and I can't say it, kajoo, whatever it is, when he's using Joyce's apocalyptic, howl, they show a video with atomic bombs going on. So if you ever, and this is in the Magical Mystery Tour, I'm sure this is where it's taken from. So that video I have it, basically it's available for people looking at the article. You can see it. And so, to me, this is like, it's cryptic. One can contest it, but I think the framework that I offer is coherent, and then it fits into other cryptic explanations. Once you start decoding the literature, it becomes, these kinds of, like, being able to understand I Am the Walrus is sort of axiomatic. I also have at that website a decoding of Catcher in the Rye. Now that is important because when Lennon was assassinated, the assassin had a copy. It was actually reading A Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah, very
Mark David Chapman, right? Yeah, that was actually just 2 or 3 days ago, and Dark Journalist did a great job explaining a lot about how his assassination, Lennon, was related to both JFK's and Ernest Hemingway's. A lot of people think Hemingway committed suicide, but just like Vince Foster committed suicide.
Yeah,
he fell on a bullet.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that you kind of wonder, well, why would it? Because it wasn't just Chapman. I mean, in the article, I point out all of the different people who had been holding or owned copies of Catcher, including Lee Harvey Oswald.
I've read that article. Yeah, I've actually read most of your articles.
Yeah, he had like 4 books, and one of them was Catcher. And so, anyway, so I showed that, look, Catcher has been misunderstood.
Is it Robert Burns? Is that the poem?
Yes. Yeah. Catcher comes from the expression is a deliberate mistranslation of Burns's poem. It gets a little complicated, but and that's, incidentally, that's a critical piece of understanding if you want to get into the book, because I show that the book is just a complete tip to stern storyline of a Freemason initiation. I mean, the book starts out with Colden Caulfield. He goes, we'd been studying the Egyptians for 28 days, or the ancient Egyptians, right? Well, if you just look at the first, the what is called the entered apprentice, the first level of Freemasonry, you have the initiation, you have 28 days, and then you take the test on the ancient Egyptians, and it's so. I show
that's the lunar
exactly, yeah,
revolution as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. But then if you go up the levels, the next one is like it's basically, it represents an event in Solomon's temple, and in the event you have someone other than Eli sleeps in Eli's bed, and in the Old Testament you have the story about sleeping in Eli's bed. Well, then Salinger has Holden's next experience where they hit him over, they blindfold him, they hit him over the head, and then he sleeps in Eli's bed. And I say, look, guys, this is the second level of the Freemason initiation. There's just no getting around it, because sleeping in Eli's bed is just too unique of an idea, and Salinger repeats it 3 times, so to make sure he underlines all this. And I go through the book and I say this whole thing is just a big Freemason.
Bruce Carroll says what I say 3 times must be true.
You got it. Yeah. So the thing is that it's complicated, but so Burns's poem is you go, well, where does this come from? Because it doesn't actually say catch anyone in the rye. It's that somehow, that for some reason Salinger mistranslated it, and actually it is a body F word, because the poem is very body. The poem that Catcher in the Rye, supposedly Catcher in the Rye, is taken from, and Salinger mutates it into Catcher in the Rye from the F word, and then Holden Caulfield, he says, I've had this epiphany, and I really want to help kids. I really want to be there to catch them when they fall. And this is what Salinger is referring to with Catcher in the Rye. He says, I want to be there to catch them when they fall. But this is complicated. But Catcher in the Rye, do you know what this is? I mean, it's the Grim Reaper. The Catcher in the Rye is the scythe that would go through the rye and harvest it. So a Catcher in the Rye is just another way of representing the apocalypse. And so,
are you apocalypse or Armageddon?
They would be synonymous, I think, from the Freemason perspective. The Freemasons at the high level, what Salinger is referring to, is how they relate to the Book of Revelation. Okay, so they have a way of translating the Book of Revelation that is different, or they're trying to bring about a different understanding of it. The Romans took Jewish literature and created typology to give a new conclusion to the prophecies of Daniel, and this is what you get in the Gospels.
Interesting.
Okay, so if you read Caesar's Messiah, you can see that this is kind of what happened, and they wanted to make these Jewish prophecies show that a Roman Caesar was in fact going to be the Jewish Messiah, not some Jewish guy. So they created this whole process, literary process, which the Gospels are part of, to create this idea. Well,
interesting.
The Freemasons are simply the tectons. They are basically trying to reverse this. And so they have a way of understanding the Book of Revelation, where they're going to bring about, the Illuminati, the illumination of, that the bearer of light, which is why, incidentally, there's another kind of interesting thing. People say, well, the hidden secret society is satanic, and they certainly are satanic, but they simply are referring to the character at the end of the Book of Revelation, the bringer of light, or Lucifer. This is to them God.
That's interesting.
So that's
Are you familiar with Christopher Loring Knowles' work, Joe? Secret Sun?
No, I don't know enough about it.
I think that you might find some, no pun intended, some illuminating material over at the Secret Sun regarding the Lucifer figure.
Brother, I am on my way. As soon as I wake up tomorrow, I'll go and check that out. Thank you.
Are you, Miguel, I hope you don't mind if I ask this. Joe, what's your take on the Archons?
Before I answer, it's probably a good idea.
Over my pay grade. It's an interesting idea. I don't have any, I can't really add anything to it other than, I haven't studied it in depth. What do you think about it? Tell me.
Miguel, maybe you'd want to say something about the Archons and what the basic definition is?
Well, yeah, first I'd like to say, I hope you guys can hear me, but I think if he's going to read Chris's stuff, he needs to read Lucifer's Technology. So maybe Lee, you can send it to Joe, because his blog, Chris's blog, is so spanning, and there's so many. He's right now focusing on the whole siren thing, but Lucifer Technologies, Joe would like it. But yeah, I mean,
that's a good idea.
The Archons.
I really do want to study that, but I'm just there's so many different parts of it. It's like a schematic that needs to be completely built out or uncovered so that the public can see what kind of a world we live in, and they can see that they are living in the slave state of their own mind.
Well, that's why I brought up the archons. I think that
Sure.
Yeah, it's like the Matrix. The people are asleep with the blue pills and they're feeding off of us.
Yeah.
We're the resource, their chattel. And again, we're in a sort of state, this dreamlike state, like everybody in modern society today, right?
Yeah.
I mean, exactly. If you think, well, World War II was coherent because Hitler was bad and World War I was good, but for no particular reason. I mean, the Civil War, well, this was over slavery. I mean, if you believe these things, then you basically are living in the slave state of your own mind. And the real history is hard to get at. You can piece at it to some extent through just analytic techniques, but there is a lot of legacy literature. They will write in code. The oligarchs will write in code because they can't write overtly. So there is code written that basically are ways that they can represent their genius and their greatness. So this occurs in like the Gospels, where the Roman Caesars were able to put a subtext to, identify the character that Jesus predicted would come in 40 years. He called the Son of Man, who was going to destroy Jerusalem. So they put in a subtext to indicate who the identity of that individual, which was a Roman Caesar. Well, you can see with the prefiguration with 911, this is a really good example of how they really do want to represent to themselves, their genius. And of course, look at Archduke Ferdinand's license plate. I mean, that's preposterous, And so you can see that there is some prefiguration, there is some symbolism that they use. And so these are critical things for us to be aware of. I mean, and then there are from time to time, there are just fingerprints that they leave. I mean, like Gordon Lawson, his participation in MK Ultra, and then him writing the article he wrote in Life magazine. You can easily deconstruct that as being
what's the teenagers thing on the cover there.
Yeah, exactly. That's just obvious neuro-linguistic programming, where you have he talks about the taking psychedelic drugs, taking mushrooms, and then he has on top of it, you have the word great adventures, and then underneath it you have the expression teenage allowances.
Right. Yeah, it makes me think of the monkeys and Dr. Joseph Farrell's recent book.
Yeah. I mean, and this is just neuro-linguistic programming. So they've studied us to the extent where they have an idea about how to code our subconscious. They can code us without our knowing it. And so, we need to build out a coherent schematic, something that people can easily understand and make sense of, so they can break down the conditioning in their minds. Right.
Is it possible that that's all just not to belittle it, but is it possible that we're just living in a dream and that's all synchronicity? Is that possible?
It is possible.
I have no idea.
The point is, it's also, in my opinion, irrelevant, because we have to respond in the same way, regardless of the nature of the reality we are experiencing. We have to rebel, because this is what we do.
So we are the Gnostics, basically.
Yeah, we are the sentient beings who are being oppressed, and our role in the drama is to rebel. And so this is our heroism and our higher calling, and we have to do it. And it's like, is it a matrix? Is it I couldn't possibly in depth go through the ontologic issues here. It's a good question. I just want people to be aware that they should be skeptical about stuff like 911 when buildings fall straight down, and then you
Miguel, you go. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying, like Building 7.
Yes. WT7's not going to go away, as No Agenda says.
Yeah.
That's the most ludicrous thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it shows. I mean, but it really shows you how the fact that they believe they can control the minds of the population. I mean, they would it's just they would never do crap like that if they didn't think that they had control over the media, but moreover that they could use the media to basically take common sense away from populations, where they tell you that no, that's just how the building fell down.
Well, there was that woman who on the British television station, as everyone knows, Miguel knows where I'm going. You too, Joe. Yeah, she's like, oh, we've just got word that WT7, 7 is fallen, and it's like still standing behind her. I'm like,
yeah, it's foreknowledge, and you only get foreknowledge, symmetrical collapse at free fall speed when it's controlled demolition. I'm sorry.
I think in this case it's called 7 knowledge.
But Joe,
very witty, yeah.
I want to ask you. So, what do you think? Obviously, there's this formula that the elite or the oligarchs have been using over and over again with the wars and the politics, controlled opposition. I mean, you could probably write this formula, code it, and sell it to some alien planet if they want. Well, it's so obvious. What do you see today as the shifts? I mean, do you see, looking at the formula, is what's the next war?
Well, I mean, what they want to do is, I mean, they basically wanted to keep us enslaved until they developed the technology to structure society the way they want it. And I think the best place to look is simply Huxley's book. I mean, Huxley was completely wired into the oligarchs. I mean, there are conversations with the Rothschilds that he had, which are recorded, about these broad stroke controls over society. Huxley was involved with MK Ultra. He was giving orders, he was like designing experiments for Jolly West that were funded by MK Ultra. At the same time, he was on Mike Wallace talking about how frightened he was about the government developing technology to control people while he was developing it for the government. He's just a complete liar. But the thing is that his book, I think, is the blueprint. And I think if you look at the delta and epsilon classes and then compare that to the autistic, onset, I think you can see the beginning of the society they want. They are learning how to dumb down humanity.
Well, that was the John Taylor Gatto book, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, are you
familiar that CERN, Joe, has released a tarot deck that actually pretty much illustrates everything that you're talking about right now about the New World Order?
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I have been told that by a couple people. Yeah.
It's called the Hexen 2.0.
Yeah.
So you might look into that.
I'm good. Gosh darn it. Hold on, guys.
I keep giving you things to look at.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm really.
I'll be right back.
That sounds fascinating.
Sure.
I really do like to do this kind of research. And this is why it's such a good thing for us to talk.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because this is where you get perspective.
Right. We're bouncing these things off of each other and informing one another.
And also, because like a lot of times the analysis, you try to approach something analytically. Man, you can make mistakes. I know I do. And so it's when people give resistance that it helps me try to improve the analysis, where I go, wait a second, I'm not on the right track there. So it's just really important because the brotherhood has been totally shattered. I mean, you have the pornographic male and the single mom. I mean, these are the archetypes of our culture. And so
we definitely need to instill a sense of reverence about sex and intimacy.
And defending one another and supporting each other,
it's basic virtue. It's basic virtue.
Absolutely,
I agree.
It's just a righteous experience for me to be able to chat with you guys. I mean, it's just, I'm sure, hey, we can find things to argue about, but
why bother? There's already enough of that.
But the energy is righteous, like it lifts me. And this is what I hope, in stuff we can come up with, it can expand out, and others will have the same experience. We'll do more analysis, and we can just become a cult of research to try to help one another, get out of the slave state of our minds.
Well, yeah, that's what it's all about. I agree. I appreciate hearing that this uplifts you. I think that's literally I
Totally.
would agree with this. It's the modus operandi.
Oh man. I mean, it is. It just makes me feel so good, because I'll tell you, like, oftentimes in my little, bourgeois reality, I have no one to talk to. I mean, I go to parties. I'm pretty well ostracized in this, I live in a very kind of upscale community, and I'm known as just an eccentric, so that on that level they can avoid me. But when I go to social events, it's like, well, what can you talk about?
Right?
What can you really talk about? And it's like, wait, we want to talk about 911? Sure, let's talk about that.
Nobody wants to talk about
You don't want to talk about,
or the Grateful Dead, or
well, the thing is, there's nothing. You see, they want to talk about the Beatles. I go, sure, let's talk about the Beatles. Masonic.
Well, Dave McGowan wrote both the book on weird scenes, right? Strange scenes, and so Wagging the Moon Doggy, of course.
Yeah, I love that book. Yeah, I think that wasn't a book. I think it was just a series of articles on the web, but I read them. And I mean, the guy was a great researcher, in my opinion. Yeah. He was just phenomenal, and I just loved his the thing on the moon landing. That just
it's pretty obvious that we're dealing with a dimensional stratification, if you will. Yeah, and that's what the moon is. But I don't want to get too out there, man. But still,
but you can see what they're doing. How they're splitting our minds apart, and with all this nonsense, they just want to. You can actually trace a lot of the mysticism back right into the Quattro Coronati. I mean,
interesting. I heard. I was listening to you on Higher Side Chats earlier. You mentioned the Quattro Coronati a few times.
Coronati, because this is where Crowley comes from, and this is where he.
There's a Libra sun, by the way.
Yeah.
His birthday is what, 10/12? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but I mean. So he comes from it, but you can see that. See, mysticism to them is an important thing to insert into culture, because it just is a little bit, as they would see it, is a little bit of bamboozlement that is sort of like a cover narrative that then they can, when they're bending history this way or that, the mysticism is keeping people from going, well, this is evil. You can't see the evil because the mysticism is just enough of a veil, so you can't quite penetrate through. That's why they brought. I mean, astrology was basically dead. These guys brought it back for that very purpose. Crowley, like Crowley come like the OTO and stuff. This comes from Memphis and Mizraim, which was the
ancient accepted right?
Exactly right. But this comes it comes from Garibaldi, of all people. Garibaldi brought it to John Yarker, and he was like number 77th member of the Quattro Coronati. John Yarker, very, very important historical character.
4 and 7 sinks right there. Anyway.
Yeah. So Yarker gets Garibaldi. He gives him this that he had discovered from the story is from some Mason who was in Napoleon's army when they took over Egypt, and they came across this ancient Masonic rite, the Memphis and Mizraim, and then Garibaldi gets it from him, and he takes it to Yarker. Yarker then initiates it in Britain, and this becomes the basis for the OTO. And Yarker creates a kind of like a process by which Crowley can become funded and powerful. But he also develops Helen Blavatsky. And there's a fascinating Masonic passport that Yarker created for Blavatsky, which is
like Muhammad Atta's passport, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, but it's like this one just says she's a really good brother. Give her what it's like. Take care of this person, right? So it comes from good old Yarker. He's like the supreme potentate of Quattro Coronati, and so Blavatsky, this is like one fascinating thing. So Blavatsky, you go, well, why would they pick her? What is her background? Now, she claims, she goes, well, I was traveling through Europe, and then I went into Tibet, and I studied with the ancient masters, and I learned all this mysticism and stuff, and that's why I was really attracted to good old Memphis and Mizraim, and that somehow ended up with me being the most important woman in Freemasonry. I mean, this is the Wikipedia stuff. Now, the only thing is complete BS, 100%. Where she was during the time was she was with Garibaldi.
Wow.
And why she became selected is not because she had a background in mysticism. Now, this is where they picked her. And she's the one who really organizes the Nazi party. And this is what she was. She worked with Garibaldi as a soldier. And she was on the front lines with Garibaldi battling the military forces of the Roman Pope. And at a battle, and I forget the name of it, but at one battle, Blavatsky took 2 rounds. She was shot twice, but she kept fighting. And she suffered a wound with a saber. She was with hand-to-hand combat, a woman, right?
Wow.
And this is absolutely true because John Olcott, who was basically, he worked with her to found the Theosophy. He said, I didn't believe it. And he made Blavatsky show her the wounds. He says he actually saw the saber wound on Blavatsky's arm that broke 2 bones. That's how severe the force was. Now, this was Garibaldi created the red shirts, right? This is the group that fought against the Pope. Now, you go through the same mystical muckamuck process from Garibaldi to creating of the nation state of Italy, and then you create what's called the black shirts. The black shirts are directly descendant from this process where the red shirts, the red shirts become the black shirts. Hitler then picks up the idea of becoming the brown shirts. But
why does this remind me of Antifa?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there it is. It just the same. It's the playbook. But the point is, Blavatsky is not some like sitting there in a lotus position in Tibet with like a Buddhist like a teacher. She's Helen Mad Dog Blavatsky. She's in hand-to-hand combat, and this was when Garibaldi then took the whole package to Yarker, because Yarker admits this is where he gets Memphis and Midra. He gets it from Garibaldi, and he brings her Blavatsky. This is where she comes from, and this is how then you get spun out into the like the God Knowledge Society, Theosophical Society, and all the BS starts occurring around Blavatsky because she's going around and getting all this stuff organized. And they know they have to normalize a lot of things, like the concept of, like nationalism. I mean, think about Europe in 1880, right? 1850, 1860. There's no countries. You've got, you have empires and language groups, but like in Italy, you've got like 15 different little potentates and stuff. That's all going to get unified. You have to have political control to do what they had in mind, because you couldn't get people who were disparate to like agree to like slaughter one another. So they had to create the myth or the idea of the German nationalists. This all comes from them.
To your point, Joe, that's actually why we have the schooling system that we have right now. Corbett does, and Richard Grove at Tragedy and Hope do really great work with this. And what I'm talking about is how German population was not fighting hard enough for the king or whatever it was. And they were like, no, screw this. We're going to go back to our villages and be with our wives and children.
Yep.
And we needed a educational system that would create good slaves, so to speak. And that's where we get the Henry Ford-esque kind of a bell rings, put down whatever you were doing and go out of the that's where that all comes from.
I got a little bonbon for you. The Pledge of Allegiance and the straight arm salute comes from the Bellamys. They're the ones that created National Socialism. Our Pledge of Allegiance, which was accompanied at that time by the straight arm salute when it first came out, because they were saying, well, here is the flag, right there. It was a flag salute, but it was called the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I didn't know that.
That comes from the exact group, the same guys, same 2 guys that were working with Blavatsky and who developed the term of National Socialism. Now, incidentally, National Socialism, remember, socialism is this workers' paradise idea, but you need organization, you need a concentration of authority. Garibaldi's partner was Manzini, who was having correspondence with Albert Pike here. You know, that's where the famous letter of like the 3 World War, that's actually a correspondence between Pike and Manzini.
I was born in Framingham, Massachusetts, which is one of the 3 living places of Albert Pike. In fact.
Yeah, well, there. So you know, I mean, so it may be related. So
I wonder.
The thing is, it's like you can see, it's this little tiny group. You know, they have Manzini. He you know, is working with Garibaldi to create the nation state of Italy. He obviously works with Marx. I mean, they don't necessarily like each other, but they had this long correspondence about socialism.
Well, of course, Engels was the one who wrote the book, not Marx, but Marx was a more public face.
Yeah, I mean, he was just the PR face, basically. You know, yeah, I agree. Yeah. And so anyway, so like now when the Bellamy's bring up the Pledge of Allegiance, nationalism, and National Socialism, it's coming from, you know, you're talking about 50, 60 people. You know, this is not a huge group, and yet all of
who are the Bellamy's, Joe? Who are they?
Bellamy's, well, there was 2 of them. One of them is really the one who was more famous. I think is Edmund Bellamy. Now, he wrote a book called "The Way Things Will Be," and this was it came out in the 1880s. A group of college researchers selected the 3 most culturally significant books in history. And they picked Das Kapital, I believe, was one of them. But one of them was Bellamy's book. The other
wasn't Catcher in the Rye, was it?
Yeah, you know, good question. But the thing is that so Bellamy, they developed the book here. They developed the whole National Socialism. They were experimenting to see how basically how they could create this intense patriotism that they needed, you know, for nationalism. This was all done. The experiments were all run here. The Bellamy's were in charge of it. They did that here for a while, and then they took the whole program to Germany. They translated Bellamy's National Socialism book into German. They developed National Socialist parties. This was long before the Tool Society or the Aristocracy, all of the cutouts that led up to the Nazi Party. They were normalizing these concepts because the idea is you have to create a nation. Right. Otherwise, it's like you were saying, no one, they're not fighting hard enough. They don't have any intense centrifugal energy. And so they had to create a nation to create the suicide machine. And then notice the incredible and unbelievable historical singularity where you have 2 leaders that both believe in total war. Winston Churchill uses the expression to say, you know, I really believe in total war. I want to exterminate the population, not just win militarily. He then, of course, firebombs Dresden, Hamburg, right? They're just deliberately exterminating the population. But at the exact same time, he is opposed to an insane leader of the Nazi Party who says, you know, if we can't win the war, we don't deserve to exist as a people. We need to fight down to the last man. I mean, I don't know. Has it ever occurred in history where you had both leaders, you know, basically saying, winner survives, a loser is done away with? It's just, it makes no sense politically, financially. It just is a crazy structure for war, even which war is crazy in any case.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what war is.
Yeah.
Lee, people in the chat room are asking if you could turn down your mic.
Oh, sorry. It's my guys. It's my
heaven
phone. Yeah. I have a professional rig. I'm going to have to hold the phone away from my face. I'm sorry that it's so loud. I'm pretty sure that
I like a good, loud, clear voice from a clear mind.
Yeah. When it comes in audio, I will smooth it all out.
Yeah, sorry guys. It's just my phone.
Okay. It happens. Unfortunately, Vance couldn't be here for quality control, but Joe,
the moon dog.
Probably, the moon dog. But even getting darker and more horrible, isn't there evidence? You've got, again, you talk about Churchill and Hitler and control opposition, but then you've got the Bolsheviks, and the evidence seems to be that they were funded by bankers like Trotsky.
Same group. I mean, believe me, you have a very tiny group. And that's why the Warburg participation in the funding of the Nazis, because first of all, it's so well documented. I mean, this isn't something that you can even contest, because the Warburg, they were on the director of IG Farben right up to the time when, supposedly the concentration camps came into existence. Warburg, when you say Warburg, you just mean basically the Jewish banking families, because they're inbred. The Schiffs, the Loebs, the Rothschilds, the Warburg, it's just one big clump, right? They have different names and different company names, but it's just one centrifugally controlled entity. This group is hand in glove with the Masonic, the Quattro Coronati crowd. It's anyway. So this.
Joe, could you talk a little more? Sorry about if the mic's hot.
Go ahead.
Joe, could you talk about the Quattro Coronati for a little?
Well, not much is known about other than just the facts that it, the term means four kings, and there's a very cryptic story that they associate with the name of it, which makes no sense. It has to do with there's two different episodes, and in one of them there's four, and one there's three, and it makes no sense. And it's a Freemason cryptic, kind of story. My decoding of the term is more straightforward. I think particularly when you look at what Warren and this group was doing before they formed the lodge, right, which was which promotes itself and identifies itself as the premier research lodge of Freemasonry. So what research are they doing? Well, they're doing research into the formation of the new state of Israel. That's what the Quattro Coronati group was doing. And so therefore, what I would conjecture is that the nation of Israel, as it's in the Torah, has three kings of the undivided state of Israel. There are only three.
There was that movie, Three Kings, with George Clooney.
That's right. So I would say the Quattro Coronati, the fourth king, what they're referring to is the creation of the fourth Israeli empire. This is what the Quattro Coronati, what I suspect it is. And that particularly seems coherent, at least to me, because if you look at the Hiram Abiff character in Freemasonry, you see that the construction of the Jewish temple is such a focus of Freemasonry. And getting back to the Beatles, I'll give you a little visual pun. In the Sgt. Pepper's album cover, there's three representations of Shirley Temple. Okay, and so what this is a little way of saying Shirley the third temple, right? You have had the two temples. And so Shirley Temple, you see there's three of them. It's just a little way there. And then of course
fantastic.
You got Crowley's face there, and and so it's just so this is the Quattro Coronati sense of humor, right? They are, they have a sense of humor, a mockery basically. And so they put the symbolism in front of you, but you're too stupid. You don't even know it's there. And, so anyway, this is what I think the Quattro Coronati is referring to is there have been, three kings of undivided Israel, and they're making a representation about a fourth one coming.
That's interesting. That's really good stuff, Joe.
Well, I mean, it's like, it's there. Hard to prove, but it would be my understanding. I mean, once you're doing you deconstruct I Am the Walrus, and you can kind of see, well, it just all seems to be this Masonic stuff. It's also vicious. It's also genocidal. And then you look at Salinger's, and Salinger, Catcher in the Rye, if you look at my analysis of that, you'll see it's really troubling, because at a point Holden goes into the Holy of Holies. Right now, he represents it by, he's going to see the room where the ancient Egyptians are, and he'd been afraid to go there. He's been afraid to go to the room.
Isn't that where they spray painted the FU or whatever?
And the thing is, so two brothers, right? Remember the brothers of the law, so two brothers get a hold of him, and they take him there, and they go, "We can't go in there. You got to go in there." He goes in by himself. I mean, this is the initiation of the high level, right? So they got the two brothers. They take him in. He goes in there, and what he sees is FU. Right now, that's what is at the top of the Freemason, pyramid. It's FU. In other words, it's we're going to run the planet and get rid of everybody. mean, that's how I interpret it. And
so obviously the Jesuits are sorry about my mic again.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
The Jesuits are obviously opposed to the Freemasons, ostensibly, at least in conspiracy culture. And
Yeah,
I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think the Jesuits are just, I mean, it's hard to actually discern because I mean, first of all, the groups morph and change through time. I mean, what the Jesuits are now as opposed to what they were at the beginning, they were Marrano. They were crypto Jews. I mean, this isn't even like open to conjecture because there's a book called A Synagogue of Jews. It was actually done by a historian working with the Jesuit archivists who went into Loyola's background and the background of all of the individuals that set up this organization, and they're all Jews. So it was a Jewish organization at the very beginning. In fact, it was actually censored by a pope later on and told to admit no more Marranos. So they were actually worried about some kind of Jewish. I mean, this was the era of the Inquisition. There was this whole idea about secret Jewish identity, right? And the fact that they might be trying to get political control through the use of cryptos or religious control. So the Jesuit were singled out as having this problem inside them. And then they also then, just as an aside, they then produced Adam Weishaupt, the guy who created the actual Illuminati. He was a student, of this
banished during the Illuminati, and then when the Illuminati,
and so then you have all of the skullduggery. I have no clue as to what happens to the organization, or if even in fact there is like divisions between I mean, it's a secret society, brother. I don't get invited to the parties. We can only approach these things analytically. I tend to just think that they're all in league, or at least to the extent that they can cooperate to some extent. I mean, it's like you have
and the Jesuits are at some level cooperating.
Well, here's what I would say. If they are not, it is shocking that the Jesuits, who should know better, are not exposing it. That is like to me, that's sort of the dividing line. People talk about like Trump. They go, he's going to drain the swamp. And I said, well, I don't think so. I think he's just a lifetime actor. I created the phrase lifetime actor to describe people who created false, personas for the purpose of propaganda. And so I think, people say, well, Trump, no, he's actually going to drain the swamp. And they have like complex ideas about, what he's trying to do against the deep state.
I
mean, I'll tell you what, I will believe it when he makes a revelation about the nature and identity of the secret society. If you don't do that, if you don't go across that line, then I just think you're a lifetime actor. And
I just think it's fascinating that he was on the WWF before.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Well, the thing that most fascinates me is that his uncle was the guy they gave Tesla's intellectual.
Oh, you know about that?
Yeah,
you would really like Dark Journalist's X series. John J. Trump is who you're talking, or John Trump is who you're talking about.
That's the boy. Yeah. Tesla's. I'm kind of interested in like energy. I think, that like just as my little microcosmic world, I have electric cars and I have like a lot of solar panels.
Nice.
So I don't participate in the
fossil fuel system.
Well, it's the political. Those guys are all, like a Masonic cesspool. I don't want to give them any money. There's technology now that I can own, and I encourage little communities to try to get out of this whole system, because one of the ways they control us, obviously, is by obviously bleeding us dry, with compound
student loans.
Yeah, compound interest and energy costs that they give to us. So,
yep.
I mean, this is obviously kind of absurd because one little thing isn't going to do anything, but it just feels good to me, so I do it.
Well, also you're having reverence and respect for the planet that we live on.
Try to. I mean, like we try to produce our own food. I mean, you can imagine, I live in one of the more upscale communities in the United States, and here we are with our electric cars, our solar panels, and our raised beds and our beehives. It's pretty eccentric because this is like, more like Beverly Hills than like a hippie commune. But, over time, we're actually having influence more and more of the people because, I'll tell you, everybody's getting cancer. Everyone. It's just beyond belief, the number of people that are getting cancer and the number of kids that are autistic. So people are sensing there's something wrong. They may not be able to put their finger on it. I don't think any of them very many are willing to walk into conspiracy theory, but they know something's wrong. And they see that my wife and I are unusual in that we're not dying of cancer. We seem to have like good energy for people in our 70s, And so they go, well, we'll mimic them. And what do they do? Well, gee, they eat plants that they grow themselves, So
are you really in your 70s? Because that's amazing.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
50s at the most. Wow.
Yeah, well, there you go. You see,
You're a word man.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, eat your broccoli, bro.
Anyway, guys.
It's really funny because I'm like a really terrible tennis player. I've been a terrible tennis player my whole life, but amazingly, I am now like training to try to win like a national title because everybody who's better is dead. I'm just outlasting everyone, you
remind me of the book Infinite Jest.
That's a weird thing. I was just reading that book last night or looking some stuff over that. But
no shit.
Yeah. But anyway, guys, I think we're ending. We must end it now.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Hope I can come back and chat it up. I was like way too talkative. If we can do it again, I would love to be able to be the one asking the questions of you guys.
Sure, yeah.
I would love to do that show. If that's something that ever is interesting to you, please put me on the schedule because I have like just in my little notes here, I've got about like 20 questions I want to ask you guys.
All right. Well, next time we'll definitely do it.
Let's do that sometime. It'd be fun.
Good energy. Yeah,
fun for me. Really fun for me. Really appreciate it. Hey guys, thank you so much for having me on. This is like the best date I've had since high school.
Well, everybody in the chat room looks very happy. Next time,
man. Hey, thanks, guys.
Questions, and we'll do it. So, Lee, thanks for being here, and Joe.
Thank you, Lee. Pleasure, buddy. And
my name's Nathan Lee, by the way. It's just okay. It's okay.
Nathan, can you send me your email? Miguel,
Joe, we'll definitely talk. I
really want to talk to both you guys.
I just started a new podcast called The Six of Swords, so you're welcome. Both you and Miguel are welcome to come on that.
I'd love to come on it because, when we talk in private, we can get into some controversial stuff.
Oh, now you're talking.
All right. Well, thank you guys for being at Heretics Anonymous.
All right, peace. Take care.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Guys,
everyone.
Thank you, Miguel.